I never expected a simple Halloween display to trigger something resembling a horror movie in real life. But that's exactly what happened when my over-the-top haunted yard collided with the infamous Karen HOA. It started with an official-looking envelope slipped under my door at dawn, like a grim omen. Inside, a letter threatening fines if I didn't immediately remove unapproved seasonal decor. Normally, I'd shrug off a little HOA drama, but this wasn't your average request to trim hedges or repaint the mailbox. The letter mentioned potential legal action if I refused to comply. One neighbor even warned me, "Be careful, they'll call the city or the police if they think you're ignoring them." My first thought, are we really about to go to war over plastic skeletons and blinking ghosts? Challenge accepted. Before we jump into the ghoulish details, let's talk about what's really at stake. Sure, a letter from an HOA might seem mild, but in this particular neighborhood, an HOA literally named Karen, the rules are more binding than a sorcerer's spellbook. If you step out of line, you're looking at stiff fines, property liens, or even forced removal of beloved decorations. Some families have caved under this pressure, tearing down everything from small garden gnomes to patriotic flags just to avoid financial ruin. Then there's the bigger picture, community spirit. I've always believed that Halloween is about fun and freedom, letting imaginations run wild for one glorious, spooky month. But under the iron-fisted watch of the Karen HOA, that sense of fun evaporates like morning fog. Neighbors whisper about how they used to decorate but stopped after a barrage of citations. Kids don't trick-or-treat here as often, fearing there's no real holiday excitement. The entire neighborhood feels haunted, but not in a festive way. If I back down, that everyone should back down. No more inflatable ghosts, no more witches' cauldrons, no more gravestones and fake spiderwebs. Essentially, no more Halloween magic. If I stand my ground, I'm risking escalating fines and possibly a legal battle. But if I don't, we lose the very essence of neighborhood joy, letting creativity flourish even if it's a bit quirky or over the top. So yeah, these are more than just yard decorations. They're a litmus test for how far an HOA's reach should go into our personal lives and traditions. From the outside, my house looks unassuming most of the year. A neat little suburban home with a cozy porch. Come October, though, I turn into a full-blown Halloween fanatic. I'm talking life-size zombies crawling out of the ground, flickering lanterns lining the walkway, a cluster of tombstones labeled with punny epitaphs. Here lies Barry D. Live, for example, and an 8-foot inflatable spider perched on the roof. Neighbors often stopped by in previous years just to snap photos or have their kids pose with the skeletons. This year, I decided to up my game even further. I built a makeshift haunted gate leading into the front lawn, complete with creaky-sounding hinges and a motion-activated ghoul that screamed whenever someone crossed into my yard. But from the moment the first rubber bat swung in the breeze, I sensed trouble. My neighbor, Mr. Diaz, gave me a heads up. "Careful, President is on the warpath about unauthorized lawn features this month," he warned. Leaning over our shared fence, last week she cited someone for having too many potted plants, said it ruined the visual uniformity. I laughed it off, but the morning after I'd completed most of my decorations, I woke up to that dreaded envelope. The letter inside was short, stern, and jam-packed with legalese. Under the authority of the Karen Homeowners Association bylaws, Section 14A through 14E, you are hereby notified. My eyes skimmed to the phrase, "Non-compliance will result in immediate fines." Still groggy, I grabbed my phone to take pictures of everything, both the letter and my yard display. No way was I going to tear down my beloved Halloween decor without a fight. Just as I was finishing, a sharp, rapid knocking rattled my door. I peered through the peephole and saw her, the infamous Karen, a middle-aged woman in an immaculate beige cardigan, gripping a clipboard like it was a weapon. I swung open the door. "Good morning," I said, forcing a polite smile. She didn't return it. "I trust you've read the letter?" Her voice had the clipped efficiency of someone who has no time for pleasantries. "Sure did," I replied. "It's interesting. May I ask which specific guidelines I'm supposedly violating?" Karen flipped through pages of typed printouts, obviously from the HOA manual. "Your display height exceeds the permissible limit of 4 feet in front lawns." She pointed to my 8-foot spider. "You have sound devices that could cause disturbances." She gestured at the screaming ghoul. "And you have at least 5 decorative objects in excess of the maximum allowed number." I raised an eyebrow. "Maximum allowed number for holiday decorations? I thought we had an exception for seasonal events." She sniffed. "That only applies if they're tasteful and do not create a disturbance. I'd say these," she flicked a hand at the undead garden gnome, "are quite disturbing. That's the point of Halloween, I retorted. Her face hardened. You have until the end of them, or you'll face daily fines, possibly more. Do you understand? Loud and clear, I said, managing not to roll my eyes. But I'm not removing anything yet. I'd like to discuss it with the HOA board in a formal hearing. She looked taken aback but recovered swiftly. That's your right, but you're already on record as non-compliant. Don't blame me if further actions are taken, like city code enforcement. With that parting shot, she stomped away. My stomach churned. City code enforcement? This was escalating faster than I'd expected. Suddenly, my playful Halloween hobby felt like the opening salvo in a legal thriller. I wasn't about to give in, though. I'd invested time, money, and passion into this spooky setup, and the more she threatened, the more determined I became to fight back. By mid-October, the neighborhood buzzed with chatter about my impending clash with the HOA. Some neighbors discreetly voiced support. Others warned me not to poke the beast. You don't want to make Karen angrier, whispered Ms. Lee from 2 houses down. She slapped massive fines on folks for smaller offenses. But I'm the type who, when told to tone something down, tends to go bigger, especially on Halloween. So I hatched a plan inspired by my frustration. I'd make Karen part of the display, channeling the comedic jab that might push her buttons. Similar to how a certain cafe confrontation script turned the antagonist's intensity into a satirical focal point. I rummaged through my collection of old costumes and mannequins. I've got quite the stash thanks to years of haunted house experiments. Eventually, I pieced together a mock HOA enforcer figure. I dressed it in a prim cardigan bought secondhand, pinned a fake name tag reading Karen, and even slapped a plastic scowl on its face. The final touch? A clipboard with the words violation notice in bold red letters. A small voice box inside repeated lines like, "This yard is in violation," and "I'm calling," whenever trick-or-treaters walked by. Was it petty? Perhaps. But I figured if she wanted to scare me with legal threats, I'd scare her, and the whole neighborhood, right back with a comedic reminder of her overreach. Overnight, my yard's Karen mannequin became a neighborhood legend. People started strolling by just to snap selfies with it. Some even left me anonymous notes of solidarity in my mailbox. "We love your spirit," or "Keep it up, Halloween should be fun." That's when Karen struck back. I returned home one evening to find a neon orange sticker slapped on my front door, a notice of non-compliance citing not just excessive decoration height, but also targeted harassment of HOA leadership. Another neighbor informed me Karen had a meltdown during an informal committee meeting, raging that I was making her a laughingstock. She threatened to escalate matters by filing a complaint with the local police for harassment and defamation. It sounded ridiculous, but I'd learned from the previous letter that she wasn't bluffing about involving outside authorities. The notion of cops showing up because of a plastic mannequin wearing a name tag seemed absurd. But then again, the idea of calling 911 over a hat in a cafe once seemed absurd too. HOAs, like certain outraged patrons, can push boundaries if they feel their authority is threatened. Determined not to fold, I consulted a friend who knew local housing laws. She told me that while HOAs often have broad power, their bylaws can't violate basic free expression, especially for temporary holiday decor. However, if Karen claimed I was harassing her personally, things could get murky. My friend recommended I keep everything in writing, document each notice, and request an official board hearing. That way, the rest of the HOA board, beyond just Karen, would be forced to weigh in. If it came down to it, I might even have a decent legal defense. So I fired back with an email to the entire board, CCing Karen, stating my willingness to modify certain elements like the sound volume after 9 p.m., but refusing to remove the display entirely. In bold letters, I quoted the HOA's own guidelines. Holiday decorations are permitted so long as they do not present a clear safety or noise hazard. I attached decibel readings from a cheap app on my phone, proving my display's screaming ghoul never exceeded 70 decibels, equivalent to a vacuum cleaner. The board replied with a notice. A special session would be convened at the community clubhouse in 1 week to resolve the dispute. Karen demanded my immediate compliance in the meantime, but I refused. The showdown date was set, and I planned to show up with photos, charts, and maybe even the motion sensor Karen figure itself for dramatic effect. The day of the meeting felt eerily similar to an old-school witch trial, except I was the one threatened with the stake of endless fines. At the community clubhouse, a group of residents, plus the full HOA board Karen front and center, gathered to discuss the Halloween decor violation. The mood was tense. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle with a table for the board members at the front. I could feel the stares from folks who sided with Karen, and from those who silently rooted for me. Karen opened the session by reading off a list of alleged violations. Everything from unapproved structures over the height limit to public mockery of HOA personnel. Her voice trembled with righteous fury. She waved around a folder of photos showing my yard from various angles, zooming in on the Karen mannequin. A few neighbors stifled snickers apparently. It looked even more ridiculous in high-resolution close-ups. Before I could respond, the door at the back swung open. 2 uniformed city police officers stepped in, and the crowd gasped. My heart lurched. Had Karen actually called the cops to this hearing? She certainly had threatened. But instead of marching over to me, they lingered near the entrance, scanning the room as though unsure what they were supposed to do. Karen beckoned them forward. "Officers, thank you for coming," she announced, voice wavering with importance. "I'd like you to hear firsthand how this homeowner is violating multiple ordinances, possibly harassing me personally." One of the officers, a tall woman with a calm but firm expression, cut her off. "Ma'am, we received a non-emergency complaint about harassment through yard decor. We're here to assess the situation, but it's not standard practice to intervene in HOA disputes unless a law is clearly broken." Karen's cheeks flushed. "This is more than a dispute. He has a giant figure referencing me by name for all to see. He's humiliating me." I cleared my throat, choosing my words carefully. "Officer, I'm not harassing anyone. This is a Halloween display. The mannequin isn't named Karen in any official sense. It's just a name tag that says HOA note. Yes, it's comedic, but it's not a personal attack in a legal sense. I haven't threatened or approached Miss Karen personally in any menacing way." The female officer glanced at her partner, who gave a slight shrug. "Could you clarify how you're being threatened, ma'am?" she asked Karen. Karen sputtered. It's defamation of my character, and he's encouraging neighbors to make fun of me." The officer flipped to a blank page in her notepad, taking notes. "Defamation is a civil matter typically. Do you have evidence of threats or intimidation?" Red-faced, Karen slammed her folder shut. "The entire display is intimidation." She then shot a glare at the board members. "Aren't you all going to do something?" At that moment, a new voice rose from the back of the room. "Actually, I'd like to speak." Heads turned to see a man stepping forward. Tall, wearing a blazer over a crisp shirt, he had an air of authority about him. Jacob Colton, the local city council member known for championing community events. Jacob was something of a local celebrity, thanks to his push for small business growth and neighborhood cultural festivals. "I was driving by to see what the commotion was," he said, glancing around with a smile. "I've been told it's about a Halloween display that might violate some HOA guidelines, but as a council member who's long supported local holiday celebrations, I'm curious as to why we'd stifle a bit of harmless fun, especially if it's not violating any city ordinances." Karen's jaw dropped. She obviously hadn't expected an influential figure to show up. The officer stepped aside, giving Jacob the floor. "If there's a genuine safety issue, that's one thing, but if we're dealing with a matter of personal offense versus real harm, I'd advise caution before calling it harassment. Because from my experience, ironically, calling the police to a civil dispute can escalate tension rather than solve it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I'd never felt so relieved. Karen tried to reassert control. "Councilman Colton, the HOA rules are very clear about." He nodded politely but interrupted in a calm voice. "I'm aware that HOAs have rules, but I'm also aware that residents have rights, and Halloween is a cherished tradition around here. If his display is within safety guidelines, doesn't produce noise at unreasonable hours, and isn't actually threatening anyone, perhaps we should reconsider these fines." At that point, the other board members began whispering among themselves. Several looked uncomfortable. One older gentleman coughed into his hand and mumbled, "Maybe we can find a compromise, Karen." Another woman added, "He did say he'd lower the volume after 9 p.m. That's a fair start, isn't it?" Karen bristled, scanning the room for allies. Seeing few, she tried one last tactic. "This is about respecting the rules and respecting me as HOA president." Jacob offered a small diplomatic smile. "Respect goes both ways, Miss Karen. From what I see, the best approach is to let him keep his display, within reason, and ensure no city code is violated. If you feel personally targeted, that's a separate discussion best handled in civil court, not by penalizing someone's holiday decorations." The officers exchanged a glance, and the female officer concluded, "No crime here. If you'd like to file a civil suit, ma'am, that's your right. But for now, there's no basis for a police report." Then, giving a brief nod to the board, both officers left. A hush fell. The board members reconvened, huddling for a few minutes. They emerged with a short announcement. All fines related to the haunted yard would be waived, provided I agreed to keep the volume at a decent level and take down the display after October 31st. Applause broke out from several residents. Karen, seething, stormed away without another word. Jacob stepped over, shaking my hand. Nice display. I'll have to come by with my kids sometime. Thank you, voice brimming with gratitude. I appreciate you speaking up. He shrugged. Halloween's about letting people get a little spooky. I love it. You're doing good for the neighborhood. And just like that, the confrontation ended with Karen retreating in defeat, my haunted yard still proudly standing, and even an unexpected seal of approval from a city councilman. By the next morning, word had spread across the neighborhood. I'd won the right to keep my haunted yard. A few neighbors dropped off candy or small decorations of their own, almost as tribute to the triumph of holiday spirit over draconian HOA rules. The Karen mannequin on my lawn became a quirky comedic symbol of standing up for yourself, and ironically, more people came by to see it after hearing about the big showdown. Karen herself kept a low profile, though rumor has it she's furious that her HOA caved. Will she cause trouble in the future? Possibly, but for now, she's lost the immediate fight, and we've regained a precious slice of community fun, without the fear of being punished for a plastic ghoul or a slightly loud scream track. In the end, this showdown was never just about Halloween or skeleton decorations. It was about expression versus excessive control, the freedom to celebrate without living in constant fear of petty fines, and the power of neighbors and a well-timed local official coming together to push back against the absurd. Sure, drama might flare up again. This is an HOA called Karen, after all. But at least everyone's seen that it's possible to resist an overzealous board and come out victorious. So if you ever feel like your holiday spirit is under siege, remember this story. Sometimes the spookiest thing isn't a ghost or zombie, it's unchecked authority, and the best way to fight it might just be with a tongue-in-cheek prop, a dash of bravery, and a community rallying behind you. Happy haunting, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.